something really, really cool with allowing like tech and worship people to kind of mix. It just creates this cohesive like team. It's like we're doing this together. We are providing support for you, and you guys know our, we know your faces, and as a result, it's a very cohesive team.
Between the Grooves is hosted by James Kurtis, music director and morning man in the Greater Toronto Area on Joy Radio, and Ayiesha Woods, Grammy-nominated singer, songwriter, and musician. Together, they talk with artists and industry insiders to discover our connection between music and faith. You can connect with us on Facebook or Twitter at Between Grooves. Now, here's James and Ayiesha.
Episode 247. That's the huge crowd of people that are listening right now to Between the Grooves with James Kurtis and Ayiesha Woods. Sorry.
Yes, sir.
It's a big build-up. But you know what? I've really been looking forward to this episode because it's something right up my alley. You know, that technical sound thing. So when you told me we were going to have Ben Crouse on the show, I was pretty excited. And, we for these interviews, and I shouldn't say interviews, for these conversations, we typically arrange these things weeks in advance. And so I've been waiting a few weeks for this conversation. So, this is going to be... I
think it's going to be everything that you hope.
It better be.
And more.
Yeah, it better be. So let's welcome Ben Crouse. He is the lead audio production engineer at Green Bay Community Church in Wisconsin. And here he is now on Between the Grooves.
On speakerphone.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So Ayiesha speaks very highly of you.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
How long have you been involved in church audio?
Yeah, church audio. So I started working in the children's ministry about 5th grade at my home church in Omaha, Nebraska. It was really, really simple stuff. We didn't do any live worship or anything, but it was just playing videos for kids and turning up and down the volume on a microphone.
Oh, nice. Like the AV guy in school, right?
Yeah. After a little bit of doing that, we went to this conference. They have these conferences out in Midwest called Christ and Youth Conferences, CIY. It's based in Joplin, Missouri. It's a weekend conference for your youth group to go and hear a lot of great messages. And in high school, when I went, my very first conference, at the very, very end, they asked to everybody in the room, has anybody given their life to Christ this week? And some of my peers from my church stood up, and that was great. And then after that, they asked, okay, we know that this has been an amazing conference, but we asked, has anybody this week even thought of vocational ministry full-time? And I didn't even know what that was, but I just felt compelled to stand up. I think that really was just the Holy Spirit taking that, and that was when I started thinking what would this look like? I didn't really ever think I was actually going to be just a computer programmer. That was my dream in high school. I really enjoyed working on computers, and so I talked to my youth pastor, and I started learning drums just to, get into worship and understand what worship was. That really was a draw to me.
Do you have any other musical ability besides drumming?
I sing a little bit. I graduated from Nebraska Christian College with a worship degree and a tech degree.
Okay.
A tech arts degree.
Awesome.
It's interesting because, and this isn't to toot my own horn or anything like that, but I've been involved in church audio for, I'll say, 35 plus years, but...
toot. I'll toot it for you.
Yeah. Well, it's just as a volunteer. I wasn't on staff or anything like that. Although I did get asked to be not really on staff, more of a, hey, would you do it part-time and be our, main audio guy? I actually turned that down because I thought, I believed it would become more than just a part-time thing. I believed as, and not to, downplay or to point the finger at any church or anything like that. But a lot of times what happens, this happens a lot with youth pastors where, we can only afford a part-time youth pastor. So we're going to hire you as a part-time youth pastor, but it's full-time hours. Right?
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to get caught into that situation because I had a full-time job and I wasn't going to let that become my life, and then I don't have time for anything else. So I turned that down. But I actually stepped down from doing any sound in church about a month before the pandemic, which was, for me, it was great timing because I had had enough. And you know, when the pandemic hit, that was a whole change in the way things were done anyways, with, you know, involving video and all that.
Right.
And so I was quite happy sitting back a little bit. But I'll say this, the one of the things that got me involved, I guess I got involved because I was just kind of interested in the technical aspect of it all, right?
Right.
And it was around the time that I was going to college for radio broadcasting. And I think after my first year there, I was sending out my resume trying to get some kind of part-time job that would hopefully lead into a full-time job. And my resume, one of the places I sent it to was a Christian TV station. And I never heard back, and then I ended up getting a job in radio part-time. And then like a month or two later, I finally did hear back from this TV station. And this has always kind of been etched in my brain. When I talked to the guy at the Christian radio or Christian TV station, the first question he asked me was, "What musical instruments do you play?"
Do you feel like it was important, though?
That question?
Yeah. Do you feel like it was important that you had a musical background for being involved with tech?
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For me now, because then eventually I was in charge of the tech, primarily the sound, in a couple of different churches. And anytime I was looking at, you know, having anybody come on board as a volunteer to be a sound guy, that's the first question I would ask. Because if they have the musical ability, they know what an instrument is supposed to sound like. They know what to listen for. They know what harmonies are. They know what the mix is supposed to sound like. Instead of just a guy with computer background thinking, oh, it's just, you know, buttons and stuff. And so that's
You're right.
And so I actually have a problem with churches wanting to adapt too quickly to the digital side. And the reason why I have a problem with that is because if you don't understand the analog side, if you don't understand how the buttons work and how the frequencies work and all that stuff and how to make things sound good, then it's useless for a guy who doesn't have any musical ability at all to go on the digital side. You got to know the technical side of things before you go all digital and just you know automate and all that fun stuff. You got to know. You got to have the right background. So I've done sound seminars where I don't even talk about all that stuff. I talk about here's how sound works. Right? Right from the basics. And here's how the microphone works. And here's the different types of microphones. And here's the different ways we use sound, whether it's sound reinforcement or broadcast or whatever else. That's the stuff I teach on because to me, if you don't know that stuff, if you don't know the basics, you're not going to be good at the other stuff. But I mean, what are your thoughts, Ben?
Yeah. So my first sound was like the old Mackie. But I didn't really, that was in high school, so I didn't really fully understand EQs. But actually for me, I'm young enough that my first time like understanding EQs was with the Behringer S32 when that came out and became super available for a lot of churches. And it was really cool because you could visually see the EQ. And I think that was, that I've used as a huge training tool for a lot of people is like understanding, giving them graphs of like, hey, this is what a song sounds like when it's played on the radio. And this, if you see like the low end isn't as high as we currently are running it here, but that's because it's for online or the compression. This is what compression does. And this is why it's important for an online mix. With digital, I don't know. It's interesting because I understand having the basic building blocks of working with analog, but for me personally, I actually never grew up with that analog. I've talked to a lot of my volunteers who did grow up with that, and they had some crazy stories talking about how for all the sound effects, like you couldn't just press a button and they would play. You'd have to cue them on a disc, and they would do this this theater production actually at the church that I'm currently at. They don't do it anymore, but they did. and it's been fun to hear those stories. And so, I don't know. I think I personally love the digital age, and I love the affordability that it allows for a lot of churches to be able to do things that they couldn't do, or before it would cost 5-6 times the amount just for like this small thing, but now it's a simple computer program.
Yeah, I'm not trying to downplay digital. My only point there was, if you don't understand how it all works and you're just there to push buttons but not make it sound good, right? Anybody can push buttons. Anybody can turn a mic on and off. But I like what you said about the EQ and understanding the EQ, because if you've got somebody playing a guitar but it doesn't sound like a guitar, or if you've got somebody singing but it doesn't actually sound like them, it sounds like somebody else because they don't know how to EQ, that's the issue I have. So, the whole musical background for me is a big thing, because then you know what a violin is supposed to sound like. You know what a piano is supposed to sound like. You know with a person's voice what it should sound like,
Yeah, for sure. The way so some of my audio volunteers, a lot of them do play on the stage a few times a week or a few times a month, and then do tech as well. Those are fantastic volunteers that I have, but some of them are extremely good and they actually don't play an instrument, but what they do is they listen to a lot of different types of music,
right?
And can understand and speak out, and they have that artist brain of understanding what it should sound like, but even though they've never actually picked an instrument, they're fantastic at it.
So I would suspect they do have some sort of musical ability. I mean, they would obviously know what harmonies are. They would know, like if you've got 4 people up there on the stage and one of them is singing the lead and the other 3 are singing harmony, or supposed to be singing harmony, but only 2 of them are, then the third one is like, okay, why is their mic even on? Or maybe you just pipe them through the monitors, but they don't need to be in the mains because they're not offering anything extra to the mix.
Right. That's interesting, though, that you said your volunteers, you have some volunteers that actually are vocalists or musicians for services, and they also volunteer in tech. That's something that I may need to begin to implement at our church, because the importance of having an ear for music and running tech, specifically our stream online, man, like if we could have some Ben's and some James Kurtis techs back there working our online stream, it would be so much better. But yeah, it's definitely something I want to look into and think about doing.
It also helps. It's different because with working with volunteers and working in the church, it's really, really important for it to, like, the goal of the tech volunteer help create a distraction-free service for people to accept the word of Christ. And a lot of times, you're giving people that they need a lot of training, and it's a really, really fun journey, and something really, really cool with allowing like tech and worship people to kind of mix. It just creates this cohesive like team. Like it's not, they're just the musicians, they're on stage in front of people, and then we're just making sure they sound good. No, it's like we're doing this together. We are providing support for you, and you guys know we know your faces, and as a result, it's a very cohesive team. And working with volunteers, it's so important. And sometimes I know I've been to places where the product is over top and almost more important than, like, the end result is more important than the journey to get there. And that's hard. It's hard to do because you're always trying to top next year, top the year after that.
Right.
If you take the time to enjoy who you're doing this with and the people that you're bringing alongside, And if you can do that and strive for excellence, like push people to,
right.
hey, I want to make this your own. Make this thing that you're like, I'm excited to do. We're going to have, we're having Mike Donahue here this weekend. He's going to do a concert.
Okay.
And I have a bunch of tech volunteers that are happy to come, and they're excited to like set up. We're renting some lights, so they'll get to learn a little bit of like lighting stuff from our local lighting rentals. We have a guy who comes in, and this is what he does, but he is such a good teacher, and all my tech volunteers learn a lot from him, so we'll be able to do that. But it's just going to be a really, really fun Saturday to just bring along people and accomplish stuff together.
I like what you said about
great.
the cohesion. Is that a word? Cohesion?
Cohesive.
Yeah, that word. That word. Yeah, I don't know how to say some words. That's okay.
You were supposed to say it real fast.
Yeah, if I say it real fast and just slur it, nobody will notice. But I like what you said about the tech guys and the worship people. I've always believed it was the same team anyways. The tech guys are part of the worship team because you're all working together anyways, and one can't work without the other, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And then your point about the fact that you got Mike Donahue coming in town, and he's a great guy. I always loved doing these special productions, whether it was a group coming in, for a Sunday service, or like a choir, or it was, a Christmas production or whatever. I loved doing that stuff. I mean, I found it highly stressful sometimes, and that's just part of the reason. Part of the reason for me is because I don't want to age myself or date myself, but talk about old school and stuff, non-computer, non-digital way of doing things. I remember we had one production where I guess I was one of the directors, but I was also the production director. So I was a director of the presentation, but I was also the production director. And I think I was one of the co-writers of the script, if I remember correctly, as well. And we decided to have all of our music elements pre-recorded but multi-tracked. So what I did is I decided I was going to play it back live so I could do the mix live as if it were a live production. And I'm glad I did that because we had one time when we had one of the singers, I think it was Joseph. It was a Christmas production, and it was Joseph. And he was supposed to pick up the mic and sing, and he forgot to pick up the mic and sing. And so I left the volume down. It was multi-tracked. It was all recorded. I had his voice, but he was just lip-syncing.
Okay.
But he didn't put the mic up to his mouth. And so I left the track down until he brought it up because I didn't want people to know it was pre-recorded. I wanted everybody to think this is live, and it sounded great because it was multi-tracked and we were able to do that. There's a lot of things you can play around with all of that, but a lot of work too when it's multi-tracked and you want to play it back live because now you got all that extra stuff to worry about, all those extra buttons and all those extra levels to worry about.
Yeah,
sure enough.
But a lot of fun because there's like you said, a learning curve where there's maybe technology you don't necessarily use every Sunday, but you're using it for these special events. It's great.
Mm-hmm. That's how I felt with when we met. When I met Ayiesha, she was out here playing for a Women's Known conference, and I was running the audio. And that, to me, it's like one of my highlights of the year is like doing something special. Like that is something fun. It's you get that conference feel where we can bring the house room a lot louder than we normally do on a Sunday because of that conference feel. So that's so much fun doing. Also, it's one of the best feelings in the world when you can pull something off and nobody notices. And no one knows the amount of work that went into it, but you're like secretly, like you and your team, you're like, man, we did that. Like when, if the singer forgot to grab a microphone, that's like, wow, no one noticed. Like, he sounded great, and it sounded like him, and that is so cool. And you can be like, yeah, guess what? It wasn't him.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Oh, it was.
Yeah. Okay, so sharing little tips and tricks and stuff like that. You mentioned about the fact that you could get away with cranking things up a little louder than you would normally get away with. I used to love productions. Like I remember one Easter we had this big. I forget what the song was. It was just, we were doing an Easter production, but it was just a really short thing. It was like just a few minutes long, and it was acting out the scene with music. And so it was some big song that was a big hit that year or whatever else. And so we had this big cave, and it was basically meant to be the tomb. And then we had the rocks kind of burst out in slow motion with flashing lights and stuff. And there was this big climatic buildup with the music and stuff like that. And what I've found doing audio, even on a Sunday morning service, is if people are moved by a piece of music and it has a majestic type ending, like a build up to this ending. I've had, say, Ayiesha singing in church or whatever, and it's got this big build up to the end of the song. I can actually build up the music and drown her out, and even turn her mic off, and nobody would know. And I can crank up the volume to many, many decibels louder than what would normally be accepted on a Sunday morning, and nobody would notice. They would just have a big cheer afterwards, right? And you can get away with stuff like that, and nobody notices. They just, wow, what a powerful song. You're welcome.
You're welcome.
The fun thing with sound is a lot of times people say it's too loud, but really it's just a bad mix. I tell that a lot to my volunteers, because you can play it at 92 dBA, and you could have a very, the same room next week playing at 88 dBA, and it sounds louder because they forgot to cut out the highs or something like that. So that's always a fun thing to figure out.
What I found in a lot of churches too, sometimes the acoustics, it's just a bad church acoustically. And so it's an ongoing fight, because
it's a bad church.
Well, no, it's just an ongoing fight with people. Like my mom, as a good example, she's got very sensitive ears. So she's 80 years old now, and she finds her ears are very sensitive. And so in the past, when she's visited my church and I was doing sound, she would complain about how loud it was. Now I do like it loud. Don't get me wrong, but nobody else is complaining, and she's like holding her ears. And so at her age, with her ears being so sensitive, maybe she needs to be wearing earplugs, or maybe she needs to be sitting somewhere else. Don't put yourself right in front of the speaker.
I have a question. Was your mom in Florida this past Sunday visiting our church?
Perhaps. No, she wasn't. But so that happened in your church?
Yes, on Sunday.
Right.
Yeah, we had that happen a few times, and our room is not. It has basically three, like a cluster of speakers, left and right, and so the room sounds differently. And the older sound engineers who have been there for a while, they offer earplugs, but then they also take the time to go and say, "Hey, where were you sitting? Could I suggest this spot instead?"
Right.
That's
just because we know, up closer. It is a little bit more fuller sound, and then if you're sitting in the very back, even though it sounds like it's super far away, you're getting all that bounce off of the back wall.
Yeah.
And so it's actually sometimes a little bit louder if you're sitting against a wall. So, yeah.
That's awesome. One of the things we've done in our do that.
Yeah, one of the things we've done in the past as well. I've seen churches where they'll add those fill-in speakers, like halfway or three-quarters the way into the sanctuary, like towards the back, where they've got these speakers that just add some volume, if you want to call it that. And the purpose for that is to lower the main speakers a little bit. So the music or so the sound is more evenly distributed. But you do have issues in churches where it does bounce off that back wall or on a side wall or whatever else. And so, it depends on where they're sitting. So if you're able to help people along and say, maybe try sitting over here next week and see what happens. I don't know that any sound guy has never got any complaints.
Something really, really cool as a story. I remember hearing this from the Known Conference, Ayiesha. I was there, and my wife was attending, and she sat with this older lady. She didn't attend our church. She attended another church in town, but she was there. And I was playing it quite loud. We were going about 95, 96 dBA, just for that conference feel with the big songs. And she was there. She was plugging her ears, but she was worshiping. Like, it was such a cool experience because she understood that if younger people in the younger generation enjoy this and this is what is meaningful for them, like, I want to be a part of that. I want to be able to teach them or even, like, show them, like, hey, this is what that hymn means to me when we do Great Is Thy Faithfulness.
Right.
It was so cool because I kept asking, like, Adrienne, I, like, would see her plug her ears, this lady next to my wife, and she's like, no, she just loved it, and she loved everything. She thought it sounded really good. She just had to plug her ears during the big, heavy parts, but she loved it, and she would worship through that. And it was so cool. Yeah.
That's neat. Well, I do have a question for you. How involved are you in the creative process with planning services?
Oh, yeah.
I know you're tech, but, you know, with the creative things.
Yeah. Our church, it's really interesting, actually. I haven't been to another church that, like, pairs the sermon and the worship and all aspects of it together as the church that I'm a part of. We do Tuesday mornings will be teaching team.
Okay.
Sit down with, it's really kind of like an open thing to our staff and a few volunteers if they want to come, if it's their gift to, like, they're really passionate about what's, like, taught from stage. And they go over the week how stuff landed, and then they talk about, like, ideas for the next sermon. And then that afternoon we have a programming team with a bunch of people. I'm in that team, and we talk about worship songs. We talk about ways to do it. We look at 2 to 3 weeks ahead. But yeah, I am involved in a lot in the creative process. Something fun we're doing this Christmas. I'm super excited for it. We're wanting to portray the hope and just, like, bring people into the story of Christmas and understand, like, it's your story too. But we are doing a children's pageant, which our church hasn't done a children's pageant in, like, 10 years, I think.
Wow.
And so it's going to be really fun. We have 3 scenes planned. And we're excited for all the chaos that it brings. We don't expect it to be perfect. Like,
right.
It's that joy of, like, seeing the kid on stage that who's very loud continually through the whole thing. Like, it's just such a joy to see the passion and to explain that, like, those kids on stage, some of them get it, but some of them, they're just playing this play and they don't understand that their part, like, the actual part that they are playing, like Mary, like the one who gave birth to Jesus, like, they are just playing this part, but they don't fully understand the bigger story. Sometimes, like, the older kids do, but it's really, really cool. Yeah, but I am involved a lot in the creative process. Last year for Easter, we did, for the first time, I was able to pair tracks and click with a video. And so we did that as an opener, and it was actually really funny. We had a drummer call out, and so I actually ended up playing Tom for the Easter opener as the technical director. Yeah, and then I ran backstage afterwards. It was fun. It was definitely...
You got skills, mad skills.
But I have a fantastic team of volunteers who are passionate and love learning. And I think that's one of the most important things I could just challenge other audio people is, like, never lose the love of learning. Because, you can... Yeah, there's so much that you can do if you have that passion for learning something new. And no matter who it's from that you're learning, just continue to strive to learn.
If you want to learn, be tech for a children's production, because there's a lot of stuff that happens that you got to move on a dime, for sure. There's it doesn't matter how much you plan, there's always something going to happen.
Yep. That's if you want to learn patience and how to be calm in a storm.
See?
And that's the other thing. when stuff happens, you have to be able to handle it calmly. If you freak out, your volunteers are it's going to be hard for volunteers to not trust isn't the right word, but just I guess trust that you're leading them, if that makes sense. So just being able
makes
to
a lot of
be
sense.
calm and just strive for excellence. And even if stuff happens, just being able to be okay, here's something. And then also taking volunteers along with that troubleshooting process and explaining okay, so if this goes wrong, right now, this could happen and this is what we would do. And so just setting up all those backup features and explaining that to volunteers to help explain to them how it works with troubleshooting. So, yeah.
I got a couple of things. I got a couple of things to share, and I know we don't have all the time in the world here, but I was attending a church, and I was doing the audio in this church, and I was one of the main audio guys, I think, at that point. I don't think at that point I was in charge of the audio, but I eventually became. And we were in a Sunday morning service, and our main amp blew. And it was in the process of blowing up, in a sense, not literally, obviously.
Oh, geez.
But there was this loud hammering sound, every 3 seconds. It was just boom, 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 it was starting to go. And so we, the entire tech team and our music director, who was actually on the organ at the time, because he was a very skilled musician, we had to basically move on a dime. Now, we were very fortunate to have a backup system in place. We had our old sound system still had the old speakers and the columns and stuff. We never used them.
Geez.
And they weren't very good speakers, but on a dime, we were able to, very quickly change the connections and get everything working on the old system, not knowing what the issue was. We didn't know it was the amp until after the fact, but we had to, the service must go on, as it were. So that's the one thing I wanted to share, just as, as far as tech guys being able to, be creative and not, freak out too much, because they've got to be calm, cool, and collected, and, okay, we got a problem, let's deal with it and move on.
Right.
Understanding that a lot of times people are pointing the finger at you when something does go wrong, right? But the other thing I wanted to mention is I've been in churches where, and a lot of churches do this, where here's a piece of paper, a half hour before the service starts, and this is they call it the order of service. Here's everything that's going to happen. It's the plan. It's the roadmap. Here's, first thing we're going to do is this. It's going to be praise and worship.
Sure.
There's these 3 songs, perhaps. Then somebody's going to step up and do the announcements, and it's the structure of what's going to happen for the next hour or however long, and that's fine, because there's a game plan in place. I went to one church where they took us a step further. So they did have the order of service, but 15 minutes before the service started, sound checks had to be done. Everything had to be done. Now it's, for that 15 minutes prior to the service, it's I'll call it the elevator music, but it's, music playing through the speakers. The head of each department, so your sound guy, not necessarily the head of the department, but whoever is doing sound, whoever is doing lighting, the head usher, they would all congregate in the senior pastor, the lead pastor's office, and have a 5-minute meeting to say, here's what's going on. Are there any issues that we need to be aware of? Because this order of service was done a few days in advance. You're just getting it now.
Right.
But maybe there's a change, right? Oh, we've just had this come up, so, scribble that down, be prepared for this. Or maybe it's the pastor himself saying, I'm going to be speaking on this, but sound guy, I want you to be prepared because I want you to do this at a certain point in my sermon, and it's not necessarily in the notes. So anything that can come up. And to me, that was brilliant, because number one, it showed that the lead pastor cared enough to make sure that everything was going to run smoothly, and not just, I'm just going to leave it up to them and, surprise, here's some stuff coming down the pipe, and not telling them. But it was all, the lead pastor wasn't above anybody else. It was, hey guys, we're a team. We're working together here. We want to make this, I choose the word carefully. We want to make this successful. We want this to be good. We want this to be excellent, right?
Yeah.
Right. I love that too. Ben talked about not expecting perfection, but we can strive for excellence.
Right.
You know, just leave room for humanity, you know, but operate in a spirit of excellence and just watch God do what he does best.
It is such a gift when you have a pastor that understands volunteers and understands, like, yes, we might not get the perfect service, but we have family, and we have volunteers here who are like family of the church that are passionate about this. And it's really funny because I've actually blessed right now with the lead pastor. He's a creative, and he actually makes all his own slides, and they are like really good. He does graphic design. And so it's so funny because I know so many churches, like, last minute they're adding slides at the end. But he's very like considerate, and he goes through, and we do a talk through of the service, and then we run through all the lighting cues and basic like walkthroughs of like, okay, this mic's gonna go. So we do that. That takes about 20 minutes, and then after that, he runs through all his slides with a clicker, just to refresh himself on the order. He knows that, so I'll look at the screens kind of to check his slides and then make changes if there's spelling issues.
Yeah, that's my pet peeve. Anyways, listen, Ben, I appreciate so much you taking the time to chat with us on Between the Grooves.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Okay. Appreciate you, brother.
Bye.
Bye-bye. For artist advice this week, we decided to check back with Holly Taylor. Now, Holly Taylor is the president of 1016 Entertainment, which is an artist PR and marketing company. But she is also the station manager at Joy Radio in Toronto, so I get to work with her all the time. She's the host of Good Company, the afternoon music and talk show, and she co-hosts a podcast called The Why Me Project. But she's very familiar with artists and what they do, and here she is with some advice for us this week.
I think the biggest advice that I could give a new artist would just be to know who you're talking to, who are you writing the music for, and to challenge yourself to not be vague, like to everybody, but just to really think about who are you talking to. Is it someone who's seeking for more information about their faith? Is it someone who needs encouragement? And then just really, focus in on that person and write for them.
That's really helpful. Yeah, I think it's really helpful information for artists, new or old, to really hone in on your audience. Because if you don't know specifically who you're talking to, what's really the purpose? What's it really all for?
Yeah, the message kind of gets lost, if there is even a message, because you're not focused in and towards the person that you're trying to meet. Well, great advice from Holly Taylor. Thank you so much, Holly, and thank you to Ben Crouse for joining us on Between the Grooves. Really enjoyed that conversation. It was everything that I expected it to be. So thank you, Ayiesha, for arranging that.
Awesome. Yeah, you're very welcome. He's such a great guy.
Thanks for listening to Faith Strong Today's Between the Grooves podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, would you consider sharing it with your friends, rating our podcast, or giving us some love on your socials to your amazing friends and followers will only help us reach more people. We'd also love to hear from you and share your feedback in an upcoming episode. Send your video or written message to Ayiesha and James on Facebook and Twitter @Between Grooves, or email us anytime, hello@faithstrongtoday.com.